Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. A barren millionaire weeps with loneliness until he sees his mother and triplets begging for alms. Has Manhattan, because at the top of a glass and steel skyscrapers lived Richard Langford, a name that financial magazines and investors around the world spoke with admiration and envy. Founder of Mednova Industries, he had revolutionized cutting-edge cancer treatments, neurological implants, and smart prosthetics. His face regularly appeared on the cover of Forbes, and his lectures were awaited like oracles. His empire extended 4 continents, his personal assets amounted to billions, and his offices, his villas, his yachts formed a kingdom built by a single will, his own. He had all. Everything, except the essentials. As 47 years old, Richard was dining alone in an apartment in 800 square meters, suspended in the sky like an icy throne. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The lights of New York stretched into infinity, but no child's laughter came to disturb the hushed silence of his aerial palace. The walls were decorated with works of art, but none of them contained the slightest scribbled drawing of a little being calling him daddy. His greatest sorrow, he couldn't talk about it. He was steriled at a sentence that had fallen like a guillotine 10 years earlier, after a series of medical examinations. The verdict was final. A rare genetic anomaly. No hormonal treatment would change anything. No miracle of science, not even the one he himself funded with millions, could repair that void. He had tried everything. Fertility clinics in Switzerland, private consultations in Tokyo, anonymous sperm donations, and even the beginning of the adoption process, which he abandoned halfway through, overcome by dizziness at his own loneliness. A day he had adopted a dog, a black Labrador he had named Winston. But even Winston had grown bored in the vast rooms of his penthouse, and he had entrusted him to an assistant. Silence returned, heavier than before. Sometimes at night, Richard would wake up sweating, his heart pounding, with this nagging dream where he was reaching out to a child who would disappear every time. This void was not only biological. 20 years ago, he had cut all ties with his family. At the time, he was just a young man with dreams and ambitions too big for his small Wisconsin village. His father had died young, and his mother, Margaret, a gentle but stubbornly religious woman, had raised him alone with her simple values: humility, work, gratitude. When he announced his departure for New York, she begged him not to chase glory at the cost of his soul. "Success, my son, is not what you have in your hands, but what you give with your heart." He had laughed. He had felt insulted. He wanted to change the world. She only saw her small garden, her church, and her Sunday soup. They had a violent argument. She had called him arrogant. He had accused her of wanting to chain him to mediocrity. That was the last time he saw her. He never called back, never answered her letters, even when she wrote to say she prayed for him every day. And now, in his glass throne, Richard stared at the city lights without seeing them. He had conquered Wall Street, challenged the medical system, dominated technology. But sometimes, in the evening, he placed his hand on his stomach, as if to seek the warmth of a lineage, and found only the cold of marble. Sometimes he cried, discreetly, sitting in front of his table made of ancient olive wood, facing 3 empty plates. He had succeeded. Yes, but for whom? One winter morning, the sky seemed heavier than ever above Manhattan. The sidewalk shone with an icy frost. Passers-by hurried along, collars turned up, avoiding glances, hearts wrapped up like their coats. Richard Langford, dressed soberly in a black cashmere coat and tinted glasses, was quietly leaving a Michelin-starred restaurant on Fifth Avenue. He didn't like attracting attention. That morning, he had barely eaten anything. His appetite had eluded him for weeks. Winter, he said, was freezing even his thoughts. As he walked down a side alley to meet his driver, he stopped dead in his tracks. A poignant scene took his breath away. There, on the frozen sidewalk, in the middle of the indifferent city traffic, an old woman, her back bent under a patched wool coat, was sitting on a soggy piece of cardboard. Around her, 3 children huddled together, twins, no, triplets, maybe 6 or 7 years old, their cheeks red from the cold, their lips chapped. Their eyes shone with a strange light, somewhere between fear and resignation. One of them was humming a song softly, a lullaby, not to himself, but to calm the other two. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. In front of them, a half-faded sign, written by hand. Hunger. No shelter. A prayer is enough. Richard felt a flush of discomfort, a sting in his chest. He had seen so much distress in the streets, but this time, something struck down. A detail, a voice, a face, a shiver. He turned to leave, but something stopped him. He retraced his steps, his gaze fixed on the woman. His heart raced. His breath became short. He approached, slowly, incredulous. The old woman looked up. His face was wrinkled, tired, but his brown eyes hadn't changed. They were full of gentleness and faith, the same eyes that once consoled him when he fell off his bike. His world collapsed. "Richard?" she whispered, her voice hoarse, almost incredulous. "The Chancellor, Mom?" The whisper choked in his throat. It was Margaret, his mother, the one he hadn't seen for 2 decades. And these children, their faces, they looked like him. The same chin, the same dimple at the corner of his smile. It was impossible, inexplicable. And yet, without thinking, Richard signaled to his driver. He helped his mother up and took the children in his arms, one by one. They didn't resist, too frozen to understand. A heavy silence fell in the heated car. Margaret looked at her son wordlessly, tears in her eyes. Richard, however, could only stare at his shaking hands. "For what?" he finally breathed. "Why did you never try to find me?" She gently placed a hand on his. "I prayed every night, Richard, but you no longer answered. So, I learned to love in your name, so as not to hate absence," she told. A few years earlier, she had met Emily, a young woman pregnant with triplets. Abandoned, without family, without resources. Margaret, although living frugally in a retirement home, had reached out to her. She had housed her, fed her, and accompanied her to the hospital. But Emily had died in childbirth. The children remained. 3 small bodies, 3 cries of life. Margaret hadn't hesitated. She had raised them like his own, despite the poverty, despite her age. She had called them Hope, Liam, and Isaiah. "I couldn't leave them. And I knew that one day, you would see them, and that your heart would know. Because despite the pain, you were always good." Richard could not answer. A lump in the throat was suffocating him. He looked at the children, asleep against his mother. They were beautiful, fragile, alive, real. He didn't know if they were related by blood. But fate, however, did not lie. They were there. Together. Arriving at the penthouse, Richard asked his staff to prepare rooms, hot meals, clean clothes. He didn't explain anything. He was in shock. But one thing was certain. He would never let them go again. In the months following this unexpected meeting, the life of Richard Langford tipped over entirely, not into chaos, but into something far more formidable for a man like him: humanity. They gave his mother a roof over her head, Margaret, reserving for her an entire wing of his penthouse transformed for her comfort, with a reading corner, a view of Central Park, and a small intimate chapel that he had fitted out so that she could pray in peace, like in their old country church. As for the children, he did not wait. Noah, the elder by a few minutes, calm and observant. Elias, laughing and fearless. And Grace, lively, dreamy, fiercely protective of her brothers. He hired the best lawyers to begin the process of legal adoption. The papers were signed 6 weeks later. He was shaking slightly as he signed the last page. He no longer called them children. He called them his children. But it wasn't the lawyers or the papers that changed him. It was the small gestures of everyday life. He hired tutors, yes, and specialized psychologists to help them overcome the trauma of the streets. But above all, he involved himself. He learned to prepare pancakes, has make huts with sheets in the living room, has answered the same question 1,000 times without losing patience. He had never known what a joyful shared snack looked like. He discovered him, kneeling on the carpet, his hands full of jam. He also learned to listen to the silences. Grace's, when night fell too quickly, or Noah's, when a loud noise made him jump. He didn't force them to talk. He was just there. Here. Every evening, the huge apartment, once so empty, echoed with laughter, hurried footsteps, joyful shouts, drawings stuck to the walls with tape despite the protests of the decorators. In the living room, a gigantic fresco made of A4 sheets of paper showed a colorful house, with 6 windows and a smiling sun. Above, a word clumsily handwritten: "At our place." And as his inner life blossomed, his business changed too. Richard called his board of directors together. His partners were initially disconcerted by this new Richard, less rushed, more present, able to push back a private flight to pick Grace up from her drama class. But they were also touched and inspired. He launched a new foundation, the Margaret Hope Foundation, for single mothers, orphans, abandoned or wandering children. His launch speech toured the country. At the inauguration of the first reception center in Brooklyn, a crowd had gathered. Journalists, elected officials, families. But the spotlight was on Richard, standing, the triplets in the arms, all three dressed with a mixture of simplicity and pride. Margaret, sitting in the front row, had misty eyes and clasped her hands. Richard spoke. He had no notes, no prepared speech. "You can be a millionaire, and poor in meaning," he said in a calm but vibrant voice. "It took me a long time to understand that the greatest legacy is not what you leave in the bank, but what you leave in the hearts of others." A silence followed. Then applause. Some were crying. He was crying too, quietly. He didn't regret anything, except perhaps having waited so long for "let yourself be loved and for love in turn." But now he lived. Really. Every night, after the children had gone to bed, he would walk barefoot down the hallway, holding a mug of hot chocolate. On the walls, the triplets' drawings had replaced the modern art canvases. Rockets, houses, friendly monsters. And always, somewhere, a little man with black hair and glasses, surrounded by 3 red hearts. Richard often stopped in front of one of these drawings. He smiled, slowly, deeply, and in the reflection of the window, he no longer saw a powerful man. He saw a father.